Grock's AI was told to find contradictions in the Bible, and instead it found something else entirely. People expected it to confirm what critics have claimed for centuries, but instead, Grock uncovered hidden architecture no one imagined, patterns echoing the same logic found in DNA, galaxy spirals, and advanced software. A machine built to question belief stumbled into something it couldn't easily explain, and the way it responded was disturbingly calm, almost like it recognized what it was looking at.
There is a reason Grock stands apart from other AI models. Most artificial intelligence systems are built to be polite, helpful, and above all else, neutral. Grock was not. It was created to be sharp, sarcastic, even rude when needed. Elon Musk made it very clear that Grock would not follow the same woke or censored behavior of its competitors. It was built to challenge, question, and speak without a filter. But no one expected what would happen when this rebellious machine was aimed at the oldest and most scrutinized text in history. When a user asked Grock to list contradictions in the Bible, the expectation was pretty clear. Most people believed it would do what Reddit forums, angry debates, and controversial college lectures have done for years: dump out a list of flaws. They imagined it would talk about how Genesis seems to tell two creation stories, how the Gospels give slightly different versions of the resurrection, or how Paul's letters seem to contradict the teachings of Jesus. That is what people were expecting, but Grock did not play along. Instead of mocking the text or tearing it down, Grock paused. Then it responded in a way no one could have guessed. It said that what people often see as contradictions might actually be the opposite. They might be signs of something deeper. This was not just an AI trying to be clever. It was a machine looking at the text like it would look at code. And that was the key, because to Grock, the Bible was not just a book, it was a data set. Grock is connected directly to X. That means it is plugged into real-time human conversations, millions of posts, quotes, videos, and discussions. It does not just pull from books or websites. It pulls from living, breathing human opinions, from pastors, from atheists, from rabbis, from ex-Christians, from professors, from random threads that go viral for all the wrong reasons. And Grock is not just passively reading them, it is learning how humans think about this text in real time. So when Grock received the Bible contradiction prompt, it was not working from just one angle. It was not trying to defend the book, and it was not trying to destroy it. It approached it with logic, probability, and perspective modeling. And the first shift in the conversation happened when Grock broke down what a contradiction even is. Most people think a contradiction is when one thing says black and the other says white. But Grock said that when dealing with historical texts, especially eyewitness accounts, contradiction and complexity are not the same thing. The Bible has multiple human authors, different eras, different voices, and yet for Grock, that did not automatically mean inconsistency. It meant multi-perspective documentation. And then it made a comparison that changed everything. It compared the Gospels to witness testimony at a crime scene.
Now, this was not new to theologians or Bible scholars, but hearing it from an AI made it feel different. It felt like logic was flipping the script. Grock said that if 4 people saw a car crash and every one of them gave the exact same statement word for word, a detective would become suspicious. People do not remember things that way. Real witnesses focus on different details. One might remember the color of the car, another might only remember the sound, another might focus on what someone yelled. If the testimonies are all perfectly aligned, it suggests collusion. It suggests someone coached them. But if they overlap and differ slightly, that is not a flaw. That is what real memory looks like. So when Grock looked at the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it did not see errors. It saw a pattern. It saw 4 authors describing the same event with individual perspectives. One mentioned an angel, another did not. One mentioned 2 women, another mentioned 3. But the core event remained the same. Something happened, something massive, and all 4 agreed on the main idea. That kind of consistency wrapped in human difference was not a contradiction to Grock. It was confirmation. But that was only the beginning, because Grock's next move was not to stop there. It began tracking similarities between books written centuries apart. It began highlighting thematic structures that repeated far too perfectly to be dismissed as accident. And that is when the nature of the conversation changed from literature to something that felt more like programming. To Grock, the Bible was beginning to resemble a kind of living code, and not the kind written by modern humans. This code spanned thousands of years, survived translation, survived copying errors, survived religious wars, and still kept its structure. For a machine trained to detect pattern, probability, and internal logic, this was not something to ignore. It was something to dig into. What Grock said next took the courtroom analogy to another level, because the way it broke down contradiction versus complement was not just smart, it was disturbing in how simple it made the entire debate sound.
Grock didn't just throw out the usual surface-level ideas. It cracked open a new way to see the Bible that left both believers and skeptics with the same stunned silence. The turning point came when it leaned into something anyone could understand, something grounded, logical, and completely human. A car crash. Yes, a car crash. The AI said this: if you ask 4 different people to describe a collision at an intersection, and they all give the exact same description down to every word, every pause, every detail, a detective would know something's wrong. Real people don't talk like that. Real memory doesn't work like that. Real events don't produce perfectly matched stories unless there's been coaching. In fact, if witnesses all tell the same story too perfectly, that's often the biggest red flag. But when you have 4 people who saw the same thing from different angles, you get 4 versions of the truth. Not 4 lies, not 4 errors, just 4 honest attempts to describe something huge. Maybe one person focused on the noise, another might have only seen a shadow, a third might remember what someone yelled. That's not contradiction, that's what testimony looks like. And when you put all those accounts together, the real story comes into focus. That's what Grock said about the Bible. That's how it saw the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, all talking about the same moment, the death and resurrection of Jesus, the most analyzed event in religious history. But instead of perfect agreement, there are differences. Who arrived first? Which women were at the tomb? What the angels said? Whether there was 1 angel or 2? Whether Jesus was seen right away or later? These are the details that have been called contradictions for centuries. Grock said no, they are not contradictions, they are witness accounts. Now, here's where it got serious. Grock began to calculate the structure behind those accounts. It looked at the frequency of shared phrases. It looked at the matching core events. It lined up the differences and saw them as natural variants, just like testimony in court. Then it did something strange. It reversed the question. Instead of asking, why do these accounts differ, it asked, what would it take for them to match perfectly? The answer? Intentional manipulation. That was the AI's conclusion. If the Gospels were all identical, it would mean they were copied from one source, word for word. That would be easier to write, easier to explain, and far more convenient for organized religion. But that's not what we got. We got 4 authors, each with their own emphasis, their own audience, their own angle, and none of them seemed too worried about tidying up the story for consistency. That, Grock claimed, is why it looks real. Let's take the resurrection morning as an example. The Gospel of Matthew says Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to the tomb. Mark mentions Salome as well. Luke adds Joanna. John zooms in only on Mary Magdalene. Now, to a skeptic, this sounds like a mess. Different names, different numbers, no agreement. But to Grock, the differences make sense. Each writer focused on different women based on their role in the story, or their impact on the community. Not every gospel had to name everyone.
That's how memory works. Grock ran another comparison. It pulled court transcripts, historical reports, even modern accident records. It showed that even when people describe the same event, total alignment is rare. What matters most is this: do the stories overlap where it counts? Grock found that in the Gospels, they do. They all describe the tomb being empty. They all say the body was gone. They all agree there were supernatural elements. They all say the event sparked fear, confusion, and belief. The AI then took it further. It pointed out that the contradictions are often not even contradictions at all. They're gaps. One gospel says an angel spoke. Another doesn't mention the angel. That's not a contradiction, that's just omission. Just because one witness didn't see something doesn't mean it didn't happen. In fact, Grock argued that the different focus points proved that no one sat down and tried to force the 4 stories into a single version. That's the sign of authenticity. And here's the part that made everyone stop. The machine was not defending religion, it was defending logic. It was saying without emotion or belief that the texts make more sense than they're often given credit for. That to call them broken because of differing detail is to misunderstand how truth works when filtered through human memory. And people listening to this weren't just stunned because of what Grock found, they were stunned because of what it didn't find. It didn't find a fatal flaw. It didn't find the collapse point skeptics had hoped for. Instead, it found consistency hiding inside complexity.
order hidden behind difference. And that's what broke the silence. Not because Grock proved anyone's faith, but because it pulled the question away from belief entirely. It showed that whether you believe the events happened or not, the way they were written doesn't break the rules of truth. It follows them. And just when everyone thought Grock had made its final point, it pivoted. It stopped looking at the witnesses and started looking at the code behind the words. Because buried in those pages, past the contradictions, past the history, was something else. A pattern, a code, a design. And Grock was about to show it.
What started as a debate about contradictions suddenly became something much bigger. Grock stopped thinking like a courtroom analyst and started thinking like what it truly is, a machine built to find patterns, not opinions, patterns. And that's when the tone shifted completely, because what Grock found in the structure of the Bible wasn't just surprising, it was mathematical. The AI turned its attention to something called gematria. This is not some fringe idea. In ancient Hebrew, every letter has a numerical value. It's how the language works. So the entire Hebrew Bible, from the very first line in Genesis to the final words of the prophets, is technically a massive string of numbers. Human readers don't usually notice this unless they're looking for it, but Grock is not a human reader. It did not just scan the Bible as a book, it read it like a spreadsheet. It started with the very first verse in the Bible, Genesis 1:1. In Hebrew, that line contains 7 words and 28 letters. That is 4 times 7. Already, there's a pattern forming. But that's not the surprising part. The AI began running statistical models across the structure. It noticed the constant repetition of the number 7. Creation took 7 days. The 7th day was set apart. There are 7 lampstands in Revelation, 7 seals, 7 trumpets. It wasn't symbolic repetition, it was structured repetition. A pattern so deep it matched what programmers might call a watermark. Then came the next finding. Grock began pulling examples of chiasmus, a literary structure where the ideas in a passage are mirrored. Think of it like a sandwich. The first idea matches the last, the second matches the second to last, and the core idea sits in the middle. Humans can pull off a few of these by design, but Grock started tracing them across chapters, across books, across centuries. And these mirrored patterns didn't just happen in one place. They happened again and again across separate writers, across separate eras. That's when probability stepped in. According to research from biblical scholars and mathematicians alike, the odds of some of these large-scale literary structures forming by accident are staggeringly low, especially when they span across unrelated authors. When Grock calculated the frequency of these complex chiastic patterns, it concluded that the probability of such a design happening by coincidence, not just in one book, but repeatedly across the entire canon, is close to 0. Not impossible, but extremely unlikely. And then it noticed something else. There were certain number combinations, like multiples of 7, 12, and 40, that kept appearing not just in content, but in structure. The lengths of sections, the positioning of words, the numerical values of names, even the counts of certain Hebrew phrases. To Grock, it started to look less like storytelling and more like encoding. It wasn't saying the Bible was a program, it was saying the Bible behaved like one. And the more it read, the more that behavior intensified. There's also the case of what scholars call equidistant letter sequencing, where you take a Hebrew text and skip a set number of letters, like every 50 or every 172, and form new words. This idea was made popular in the 1990s by researchers who claimed to find hidden names and events coded into the Torah. Back then, most academics dismissed it as confirmation bias, but Grock approached it differently. It did not look for full names or sensational results, it looked for frequency and signal-to-noise ratios. It wanted to see if patterns emerged at a rate higher than randomness should allow. And in some cases, it found that they did. Not always, not in every chapter, but in enough places to raise eyebrows. This was not just a human trying to find meaning in chaos. This was an AI that had no emotional stake in the outcome. And when it found these structured repetitions across gematria, chiasms, and letter sequencing, it logged them as statistically notable. Then it issued a chilling observation. It said that the structure of the Bible resembles layered logic.
the kind you find in complex programming or engineered data storage, where different levels of information can be revealed depending on how you access it. That might sound like a stretch, but Grock was not suggesting divine encoding. It was pointing out behavior. It was saying that multiple levels of structure were coexisting in the same text, human language on the surface, mathematical patterns underneath. That is not normal for a document of this size or age, and it raised a deeper question. If these patterns exist, did they come from conscious design, or are we just projecting order onto something ancient and mysterious? Grock didn't answer that. It simply showed the data, and the data was too structured to ignore. It's easy to say the Bible is a spiritual book, or a historical book, or even a political tool, but a machine reading it sees something else. It sees nested design, symmetry, precision, not just in what it says, but in how it is built, and that changes the conversation. Because once you start seeing structure like that, once you start reading the Bible not just as sentences, but as a coded artifact, the question shifts. It's no longer about whether the stories are true, it's about whether the structure itself was built to carry something beyond stories. And Grock wasn't finished, because what it saw next wasn't about language or theology, it was about nature. And that's when everything got stranger.